That raises some very serious constitutional issues. And I'm litigating some of those cases elsewhere, and I actually had begun looking for cases here in Montana. But when Senator Smith decided to try to fix this situation, I said, well, maybe I'll look in some of the states where they're not looking to fix the law, because obviously it might be easier down the road to make a big difference with a lawsuit elsewhere. So there's some serious constitutional problems with keeping more than is owed. And to understand that, I'm going to back up a little bit to before the United States was even founded, back to Old England. And in Old England, when you owed money to the government, it was the king, of course. And before property taxes were even begun, they have had funny names, things like scutage. If you owed money to the government, the local tax official could come and take the property, and then they could sell the property by auction. Now, under Magna Carta, they were required to actually take personal property and less valuable property before they would be allowed to take your land. Because obviously there's something very special about land. It's where people live, it's where people bring make their livelihood often, farms. In Montana, that's still the issue. So in Old England, they would sell the property, and then, this is really important, the tax official could only keep what was owed and the cost of holding the auction. All the extra profits had to go back to the former owner. And so we're talking about before the United States was even founded, the English system, under a king, protected property owners better than Montana's system presently does. And this bill that is being proposed would actually fix that. It would return the system as it is to something that was recognized for hundreds of years before and is recognized today in the vast majority of states. If you fail to pay your property taxes, the property will eventually be auctioned off, and if it brings in more than is owed, then that money will be refunded to the former owner. So I think that it will help protect Montana from some future lawsuits. Hopefully, I will not have to sue here, and I can go focus my efforts elsewhere. Ideally, the law would also protect all properties so that there would be no constitutional issues whatsoever, but I suspect that most of the properties that are being lost this way today are usually smaller properties and often homes. So I think would you like to speak a little bit more about the specific bill? And so since we're very tight on time, we'll pass it on to Senator Smith and then hopefully have time for some questions.
Thank you, Christine. I think that gives a really good explanation of the need for the bill and why we're concerned about protecting private property rights. We had great response in the Senate on the bill. It passed out with 49-1 votes on it. The county treasurers finally got wind of the bill and started looking at it real hard, and there were a lot of things that they were concerned about with the complexity of the bill. We have met with the county treasurers and talked to them about what we want to see in the bill. And pretty much for Tom and me, the bottom line on this bill is we're not as concerned about a lot of things in the bill except for at the very end of the transaction, if there's money left over, the property owner ought to be able to receive back some of their equity. And so that's kind of the line in the sand we've drawn for the treasurers. They're working on making some amendments based on that discussion. I don't know if they're going to agree with those amendments, but we're working really hard to address the issues they have. Even if they don't agree to those amendments, we've been working with the drafter, Christina and Clint and I, to take and streamline the bill as well. Some of the things that there was a lot of concern about it was having an auction to determine the interest rate that was going to be paid while you were paying back. That's out of the bill. There's a lot of other things that were complicated in the bill that's out of the bill. And so we're using information they've given us, information the drafter has, information we have to get the bill to a much simpler level. And we think we've done a pretty good job at it. So I want everybody to really have an open mind on it and understand what we're doing. Even if the treasurers don't like the bill in the end, we think we've really addressed just about everything they were concerned about to streamline the process. Now, a lot of the things that you have been receiving from your county treasurers about the sun not coming up if the bill was to pass just aren't true. They just don't understand the bill. In the Senate, at the request of the President of the Senate, we simplified the bill so it didn't deal with all properties. The bill currently, as it's in the House, only takes and deals with properties with a dwelling on it. We need some work to do to continue to define that a little bit better, but that took and simplified the bill greatly so we weren't looking at hundreds and hundreds of transactions to just a handful of transactions. And we keep hearing from the treasurers that we're not talking about a really big volume of transactions. So we're taking that into consideration and reducing that so you're not looking at hundreds and hundreds of properties, you're looking at maybe dozens and dozens, like 12, 24, 30, something like that, which is a lot different from probably what you're hearing from your county treasurers. They're looking at, and they're also looking at how they've handled things in the past and probably thinking if we try to continue to do it the same way we've done it in the past on some of the procedures, yeah, it might be kind of complicated. We've looked into some what other states have done, and for auctions, for instance, a lot of states, big populations like Florida, they use online auctions, which really simplifies it. I've seen things come back from the treasurers would say it would take 3 days to handle the auction. Well, it wouldn't have, even the way they're doing it, but we're also giving them ideas on ways to greatly simplify it that should make the county treasurer's job a lot easier. You've probably heard things like nobody's ever going to pay their taxes again. Well, that's just not true because you're going to still have to pay your taxes or lose your property. We've heard people say, well, this will allow us to wait 2 years and always be 2 years in arrears on paying our taxes. You want to remember that the whole time you're delinquent on taxes, all or portion of it, you're collecting fines on it, interest that's going against it. It's getting more and more all the time. You'd have to be really crazy to just take and say, well, I'm always going to be delinquent on your taxes. But those are some of the questions that have come up. As we continue with the bill, we've got a number of folks here that are in the committee, and I just want everybody to understand that we are very, very open to any amendments to the bill at any level, as long as when we're through with the entire process, as a person gets to where they're about to lose their property, they're still going to be able to retain some of the equity that they have put into their house. And Tom Jacobson's been working on this for a long time. Tom, did you want to take and say anything that I might have missed? And then we'll be open for questions. Because I know some of you have got a lot of questions from your treasurers.
Well, thanks, Kerry. I'll keep it brief. If you'd ever told me I'd be up here with Kerry and AFP and UPOM all together into one supportive, unified front, I'd have said you were joking. But no, this is something back in 2013 when I first was in the House. It was brought to my attention while I was campaigning that one of my constituents, her mother, had lost her home to a situation just like this. Her husband had died. She didn't pay her bill. We find that a lot of the folks that are losing their homes are seniors, maybe early stages dementia, and it becomes critical. I can't think of anything more important than your home. I mean, that's where we raise our families. That's the biggest asset that most folks here in the state have is their home. And the thought that if I missed a tax payment and I would lose what is mine, which is my home, because of that over $8 or $500, or there's no minimum, that you would lose all of that equity. This woman that was brought to my attention, she lived in that home for over 40 years. She raised her kids in that home. And over a $500 tax bill, she lost her home. And so I worked in 2013, 15, and 17 to try to get this across the finish line. Each session, we incorporated two components. One was the notification on the tax liens and deed. And then the whole other component was what we have right now, which is the tax deed, which is the assignment. And we got a lot of pushback that this is too hard, that this is too complicated. Well, I can't think when our government says that it is, our counties say this is too hard. So it's worth it then for a senior to lose her home where she raised her kids because it's too hard. Well, I think that's shameful. And that's why we need this bill. That's why we've got to pass this. Yes, it's hard. There's a lot of things that are hard. But the fact that we're going to take away someone's home and give it to somebody out of state because they came in and they floated in and they paid a tax bill with a guaranteed return on that, and the jackpot, the bonus at the end is that I took somebody's home, I think it's disgraceful. And so I'm hoping that we can find the votes, we can overcome the pushback from some of our local entities that say it's too hard, so that we can come back and we can save more Montanans and keep their homes or keep that equity that they've earned from a lifetime of savings. So I'll turn it back to Senator Smith.
Any questions? You changed the interest rate. Question or comment? Yeah, it would change the industry. I see Matt's hand up. Didn't you, I thought? Yep.
How many of these residential properties were lost, say, in a given year average, to non-mortgagees?
When we met with the lobbyists, we were told that if we get to this end process, where we're talking about potentially somebody's going to lose their equity in their house, they were talking 9 properties in the state. Potential, yeah, 9 properties. So we're actually thinking about, knowing that's the case, right now we're only looking at residential class 4 property. We're going to ask them, well, what about if we include ag property, other places where you might have a house? So I wanted to make sure that everybody understands where we're hearing from the treasurers, the whole sky's falling. We're talking about a very, very small number of properties that probably will be a larger number as time goes by, because you can go on the internet right now and find out how to become rich by buying tax liens and tax deeds. So this is kind of a preemptive move. We're seeing that happen, and we want to take care. For me, if it's just one person or 2 people, that's not right. But as we know, it's going to be more, and now we're looking, as we talk with the treasurers, to maybe expanding what we're looking at, even to what we had talked about last Wednesday. That may be the case. But it's still going to be a very, very small number. So small that a treasurer could go out and look at the property and see what actually we're talking about. They don't have to go through a real complicated process of shuffling the deck and weeding through a lot of stuff and figure out who we're talking about and who we're not talking about. We've also found out that the Department of Revenue has a lot of really good information that the treasurers can get, and some can't, and some do, as we're taking and trying to find what properties it is that we're talking about. Additional questions? And kind of back to the question over here from Representative Redfield. Yeah, we'll change the industry, but we are actually already doing something like this in 13 states? How many states? Okay, the vast majority of states. We already have something like this, and the investors are still investing. And also, as you look through there, as I've talked to some people that have done these kinds of investments, most often when somebody takes and picks up that tax lien, they start making the payments and the penalties and the interest to the person that has taken over that lien, and at least in one case, and I understand it's in most cases, the tax bill ends up getting paid and it doesn't get to the place where they lose the property. So what we're talking about is really important, but it's not hundreds and hundreds and thousands in every tax lien that's out there. Yes?
Senator Smith, because the county treasurer is the one that actually has to make out the deed for the property when it gets to the point where they're actually going to transfer it to somebody else. If in that process, before that deed is made out, when the county attorney is looking at all documentation of the person that purchased the lien and he knows the stamp lien, did all the things he had, if they can have just a visit by some county, maybe a county committee that goes out and visits that owner of that
Representative Custer, while that's not actually part of the bill, we have heard from the treasurers that that takes place a lot of the times now. But again, the way we're taking and redoing the bill, we're talking about as you've gone through everything and you have the tax lien and it's ready to go to sell, that's when we take and pull the trigger on, okay, the first bid on that piece of property has to be at least half the value of the property on that. That's what we're talking about. So they still have, they do or can have the ability to do that right till we get to the end of it. And I think that's where we're at with the treasurers, as I've understood the things they were concerned about and the things that we've talked about. So that's certainly part of the process. And we believe that's the way the process should be handled. But we still know that there are some cases where it does get to the spot where you're going to take and sell it. Matt, did we finish answering your questions? Did you have some more? Well, what we've done, Matt, okay, Representative Regier has asked the question about the interest that you pay while you're waiting that 3 years to see if you can pay off your debt. Okay, the person that has the tax lien has it, you're paying them money. Hopefully you're going to get taken care of in 3 years. Currently the law is they charge you 10%. We had talked about having something lower of an interest rate, and that's the interest rate you're paying to the person that has picked up the lien. The county's still charging you interest on it, and you're paying penalties, and that's all taking place as you go along anyway. So that's not all you're going to pay. We looked at, some people suggested a variable rate. I've had other bills where that was really complicated. We've heard that there's one state that's 12%, one state that's 40%. I thought that was usury. Tom and I talked a little bit about it, and we thought, well, currently we ought to let it go up some, but as we're talking about the bill now, both with the treasurers and with us, we're leaving it at 10%. We're not changing that. Well, we weren't never going to make it variable, but we haven't raised it because of the penalty that you're paying to the county, the penalty, the interest you're paying to the investor. I didn't think it was going to make that much difference. Christine has some data that says it might, but that's something that we're not worried about because that made it more complicated. We've eliminated that. The question was, what happens if we go back to the 80s when the interest rate was really, really high? I guess, first of all, I don't think that's going to happen. I think our government is convinced that we're never going to have high interest again because they want to make money real easy so we can all get in more debt and keep living in this virtual reality. I believe that's the position that our government's taking. So, but to that case, if that did happen, we can always come back and reset the interest. I've worked on bills for a number of years that dealt with pre and post judgments on settlements when you lose a lawsuit. And it took me 3 years with the governor to argue over a percent above prime that I think we started out with 1% above prime. Governor wanted 3%. We ended at 2%. And I don't think we need to go back and forth like that on it. So it's probably a good idea to have something variable or something higher. But again, to get rid of complexity of the bill, we've stepped aside from that. Mr. Chairman Redfield, any more questions before you walk out the door? Okay, good luck on passing it. Additional questions? Yes, Representative Cruz.
If I'm hearing this bill right, if I was a private investor that came in and picked up a tax lien, the way it used to work is if I picked up that tax lien and I did all the things I was supposed to do, and the real owner never redeemed me, and then I went here and got the tax lien, I didn't go to auction, I just got the tax lien for the tax paid. Now you're saying that we are going to always have a public auction if a private or if the county buys this, we're going to go to auction and sell this. So I've got to be able to bid half the price of whatever the value of the house is if I'm a private entity, not the county.
That's correct. On one of these very limited properties that we're talking about. The opening bid has to be half the value of the property. Now, if you were an investor and you say, well, I can't make any money on that, let's go to the example we had of the person in Great Falls that lost their property at $1,000 delinquent tax on it. The investor picked it up for $700 or whatever the data was, and the property was valued at $139,000. Even if you didn't have all the expenses or anything else was in there, which you would, there would be, half the opening bid would be $70,000. And that's not what the investor has to sell it at. The investor can sell it at whatever they want to. So if the investor is selling it at, and by the way, the investor is, under the old bill, has already had all their expenses taken care of, but as we're looking at it new, that's still in the discussion. But the investor still has the opportunity of selling a property that they acquired very, very cheaply for a large amount. And if they were one of these folks that like to flip stuff, maybe they could take and do a little bit more to it and sell it for way more than $130,000. Plus they made 10% on the money while they had the 3 years taking place. So it's not as good as it was, but it isn't bad either. I mean, sure, Christina.
I want to briefly say that the requirement that the equity go back to the former owner is, from a constitutional perspective, it's the most important part of this bill, because there's a number of these lawsuits pending, some of them are mine, and there are a number that have already been filed and long ago won, that raise the question of whether this violates the takings clause in the U.S. Constitution or the state constitutional equivalent. And if you all remember, what that says is when government takes private property for a public use, it must pay just compensation. Now, the little snag in Montana's law presently creates a second problem that many of these other states have not had, which is you're taking private equity and you're giving it to a private individual for their enrichment. So there's a double constitutional problem on your current system. Causing the equity to be refunded to the former owner would help resolve that issue and make me less likely to sue you.
Thank you, Christina, for explaining that. That really is the case on that. Is it hard sometimes to follow the Constitution? Yeah, it's hard sometimes. Does that mean we're just going to ignore it because it kind of gets in the way? Well, I guess we have some people that think that that's the case, that's the way it should be, but there's a lot of us that believe that the Constitution ought to be enforced until we take and amend it. And so right now, private property rights are a big issue. As has been talked about before, one of the reasons why most of our ancestors came to America was to own private property. And so to take somebody's property away from them ought to be really, really hard. Now, we're agreeing you got to pay your taxes. If people didn't pay their taxes, the burden would fall onto the rest of us. We have to have some stuff done. I personally think our taxes are too high, and I think we tax things we don't need to, but we're all in agreement. If you don't pay your taxes, you lose your property. But it shouldn't be taken totally away from you without you being able to recoup some of that equity. So, additional questions? For me or Tom? Anything we didn't cover? Everybody ready to support the bill now because it's going to be perfect by the time it's through? Yes, Rhonda. I sent an email back out to Rocky just before I came here and said, what do the treasurers think about the amendments that you put out there? So I haven't heard back yet. But I want to be really, really straight with everybody, and I think everybody that knows me, when I'm saying whether they like the bill in the end or not, we're going to reduce a lot of the complexity that they were worried about, and we don't think it's going to be that big of a deal for them. Now, that's easy for a person to say that's not a treasurer, but we have ex-people here that have been really close to county government and understand, and we'll have that bill over there in House Tax. And so what I'm envisioning is we'll have a conversation sort of like this when I present the bill. We'll ask somebody on the committee to carry the amendments, and then it'll be the committee working out the details. But I think we've been pretty clear with quite a few people that were here that are on the committee that understand what our intent is, and also based upon prior sessions they've been in working on the bill. So I think we can get a good bill out of this. All right? There's a lot of food left, so grab some more. Get ready and to go out and vote.
Well, it already sounds to me like you made a
Thanks, Shirley.